Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
I have a confession to make, and it's something that I don't feel great about. Um, it was unintentional, but recently a pet frog that I have passed away. I have a fish tank that I started when I moved into my home with my family, and it recently underwent some challenges. There was one of our fish died. We weren't aware of it. There was an ammonia spike and the tank got completely out of balance. And these things always get me thinking about the larger picture and thinking in terms of scale and the greater meaning of life. To most people out there, they'll never know anything about the frog that we called sea bass in our tank and the systems that supported his way of life and the control that I had over his existence. And it's interesting because I I purchased the tank, I purchased the structure, I purchased his universe, and I laid the substrate down. I planted seeds for the plants that would help filter the water. I purchased the neon tetras that are in there. My family purchased the snails. We purchased the frog and put him in there. Added a water filter with a waterfall going into it. Added rocks for decoration and added an air pump. So all of these systems created an ecology within there, all of these hidden forces that shape the existence and the reality of these life forms that exist within the tank. Now, as I was cleaning out my tank, doing water changes, making sure that the ammonia spike went away, reducing the feeding for the fish in the tank, I he wasn't getting enough food. It makes me so sad. I was putting the pellets in there, but I guess the fish were getting the pellets before the frog was. I don't know if that's how he died, but he was thin when he passed. And this caused me to reflect on a lot of things. Number one, the element of control I have over their universe. Um, and also the relationships and dynamics of forces they may not be aware of that drive their behavior and their actions. You know, when with fish, especially depending on the pH level and the temperature of the water, could drive them into a state of aggression versus a state of let's mate and make a ton of babies. Sometimes let's make so many babies that we overpopulate the tank and destroy the ecosystem. And me, as the person that owns that tank, has a great responsibility to keep that in eternal balance. And I don't always get it right. I'm not some cruel, sadistic, awful person. In addition to caring for my fish, I'm caring for my family, for my home, for my other animals. I work a full-time job. I do this on the side. I'm a remote viewer. There's a lot going on, all with good intentions. And I think that's an important perspective to hold as we go through this podcast. As I'm tying things together, looking at this wondering that I've had, wondering, are we truly these autonomous life forms or fragments of consciousness having our own experience through free will? Or are we being gently, sometimes not so gently guided to a particular end here, to a particular state of balance in the eyes of whoever runs the fish tank we call the planet Earth or this reality? Um, as I'm preparing for this show, I'm seeing themes, signals, signposts recurring frequently in my remote viewing work in particular and beyond. But I recently did a remote viewing session and this data point came up. Now, Here's my caveats. Monthly, I'll do roughly every month, I'll do a remote viewing session, and I'm basically just looking at what do I need to know about my own life. I'm connect, and I call it my future consciousness sessions. And I've created doorways or windows or just lines of communication between myself in the moment of the session and my consciousness at a future or future points in time. I've noticed usually the sessions are valuable. Now, in remote viewing, we could consider this front loaded or semi front loaded because I know roughly what the target is. I just don't know what's going to happen in the next usually it's 30 to 60 days out, but sometimes it goes longer. You don't always know what's going to happen. And the goal isn't always let me look ahead at see what's going to happen in the news. I don't like looking at it that way. It's like, what do I need to know for my own personal life? And it's interesting because I found that sometimes I will predict things that then come to pass in my life that are significant. Sometimes something significant will happen in my life, and I'll say, why didn't I predict that in my remote viewing session? Why wouldn't I make this a marker for myself to report on ahead of time? And then sometimes my sessions, I don't understand them, or the things that I write down, I can't correlate them, at least yet, to anything in my life. So it is an ongoing experiment, but I share this because I sketched something in my most recent session. And it wasn't until after I finished the session and I was looking at my data that I realized what I sketched resembles something that I drew right today. Today's February 8th, by the way, 2026. It resembles something I drew in August of 2026 that was very profound for me. I did a series of sessions, three or four, and I think I've shared them here on this platform. Um, in the moment, my experience, I had no memory of that session. Now, it's possible that my subconscious is trying to bring something up. And I wonder, is it trying to draw my attention to something that's important? I'm going to share these two sessions with you all right now so we can take a look. But when I interpret this data, I wrestle with, is there a bigger picture here that goes beyond the session? All right, let's explore this one data point here. And then let's explore many data points here. Okay, as you can see, I completed this session on January 28th, 2026. And I labeled this a little bit differently. This is how I set myself up for what I'm going to collect information on. I wrote, what do I need to know? At times, these sessions are clouded by what I want to know, what I want to experience, which then creates an obstructing filter for my data. But what is important for me to know now and as decided by my consciousness at a future point in time? I was really trying to get past, like, there's things I want to happen in my life. And sometimes when I sit in a session like this, even though I'm trying to be objective, this is the danger of a front-loaded session, there's a part of me that starts interpreting data that comes in through that lens. And this, again, danger of a front-loaded session. So I was trying to really set my intention, and I sat with this for a moment to, you know, me, Dennis, in the future is going to decide what's important for me to know, not me there saying I want to know these things. All right, so that's what I set myself out to look at. And I wondered, is this just a representation of us using AI, something like ChatGPT? But then I looked to describe the mind. It was cylindrical, it was cone-like, it was scanning, and it was seeing in all directions and through time, and it was wise. So this is what I drew. I had this circular thing here and all these connections to life forms, which were individual minds that were out here. And it had something to do with the past, the present, and the future, just the nature of reality. Now, I'm going to go back to August, to the experience I had in August, and this is what I drew. I had this sphere with these signals coming out and these blue lines connecting all of these minds. Now, look, I'm the source uh, of this information. So the fact that I drew it in August and then drew it again in February in and of itself doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, look at this. It's not corroboration. But for me personally, it feels like it because I wasn't thinking about that. I don't know where this is coming from. It feels more like a theme that I'm trying to get out, and I can't understand it. Now, if I had to make a guess right now, what this would be, could be a data center. As we're putting these data centers online and we're becoming more and more interconnected. Okay, this is me looking at this energetic, what I was calling a data center earlier. This is where I first received that data, looking at this convergence. As a message or messaging, point of confrontation, this conversation with God, I wrote, and I don't, with a small g, meaning something that's God-like. Discovery, remittance, surrender, and a new understanding, a new system, a new life, connecting points of convergence, a central hub, a new God, a place where everything goes, where everything flows. Evangelical. And that's my initial sketch here. It's just this sphere with the energy coming out of the top, people flocking all around it. Okay. And then what's this last session here that I have? Oh, this is interesting. I had these lives in these pods here. The life is less important than the structure, I wrote. Awareness, self-awareness into the heavens. There were these heartbeat sounds. And I come back here, or is it this session here? And I had this life with all these lives here in clouds that I wrote, like being in a womb and seeing others. And another Matrix reference, Neo wakes up. And I felt that it felt off and a little bit forced, but it still felt important for me to write down. I'll tie this back to a wild theory that I had, but I've been loosely exploring for a few years now. And it comes down to the Roswell crash and Colonel Corso's book. And many of you have listened to my discussions and commentary on this. We did some remote viewing explorations on this. But my thought was, is it possible that the Roswell crash and other crashes like it were intentional, where technology was ceded to our civilization? That technology is what has now given us this information grid. Are we, without realizing it, building some kind of, I'll say Trojan horse. Who knows if it's going to be that scary? Maybe it is. Maybe it will be a good thing. Maybe this is just a stage of evolution. But is that the infrastructure that's being laid for us? Because now we're creating this grid that's going to propel humanity forward into whatever this era is that we're moving into. And I want to bring it back to those unconnected parts. I was watching Stranger Things again. I think the writing is brilliant, and it reminds me of the power of creativity and the divinity that comes from the creative process. But this sets a nice example for us. If you haven't seen the show, I'm talking about season 4 here. I'll try to be vague so I'm not ruining anything for anybody watching it. But towards the end of season 4, there's several elements going on, and they're all trying to accomplish a task, basically to fight the evil, right? So you have one tiny pocket that's in Russia, and they have an objective. And then their friends, some of them are in California, and they have an objective. And the other group is back in Hawkins, and Hawkins slash upside down, and they have an objective. None of them are in communication, but they are all working on a piece to work towards the same goal to support one another. And this doesn't get spoken about in the show, but this is something that I look at all the time is, well, is that evidence? And again, I'm talking about a fictional piece here. Is that evidence of a collective mind where there, because they wouldn't have, if one of those elements failed, then the entire thing would have fallen apart and they wouldn't have gotten the thing they were trying to get. They wouldn't have killed the bad guy, right? Or they wouldn't have gone after the bad guy. But they didn't know that they were all doing a piece to that, fighting towards the same goal. And they didn't even acknowledge this like feeling between them, this resonance between them, that they were all working towards the same thing. So they had no awareness of it. In remote viewing, we see the division of effort when you're working with a team. We all go out and we all collect a piece of data, and our data has overlap, but it also has individual pieces of it. We're working towards a shared goal, but we're not aware of what the other team is doing or the other team members are doing or collecting. There is this connection here that we're unaware of, this hidden signal that is driving us. I know that I'm biased or more I lean towards the possibility of hive mind, obviously with the books that I've written. But just because that's my sci-fi creative exploration doesn't mean that it's not happening and it hasn't already happened. If we look at the way our society has evolved, do we have a handful of human minds that are saying, we're going to build this industry, we're going to build this industry. Let's look at Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk is an example of somebody explained to me what he's doing. He has orchestrated, he's got SpaceX, he's got a boring company that drills underground. So he goes up in the sky, he bores and he goes underground. He's building Tesla robots and autonomous electric vehicles, and he has Grok, um, which is an AI mind that has, supposed to have access to all information. And it's like, wow, he's got all these seemingly separate entities. But somebody said, no, he's going to Mars. To go to Mars, he needs rocket ships that are going to get him there. He needs boring technology because he may have to build cities underground in order to survive. He needs AI to ensure communications and access to information and knowledge. He needs robots to be a workforce. He needs these electric vehicles because there's going to be no gas or fuel on the planet. And it's like, oh my goodness, all these seemingly separate things. He's one mind, but he's orchestrating all these different elements. Is there a mind behind the larger human endeavor? Is he one cog in a larger wheel of humanity with what we're doing right here? And I say that thinking about the Matrix, thinking about the Agent Smith analogy. When you challenge that, when you challenge that, you see it come out. And I've seen it in several conversations when people have their worldview usually based on the single source news information that they follow. And now what's scary right now is that AI has created algorithms that become echo chambers. They don't show you the other side in a way that's really going to give you a balanced perspective. It more so reinforces what you believe. I think the answer to that is stop believing that your possibility is the only possibility and you're always right. And I can hear the arguments now. But it's so cruel and it's so mean and it's so awful. Yes. But we got to step out and have that open mind to look at the bigger picture because there's a lot of manipulation going on. But the second you challenge it, Agent Smith comes out. And by that, I mean the second you challenge someone's worldview right now, they get angry, they get defensive, they get argumentative, sometimes they get violent. And, I watched it happen. I've been engaged in a little bit because my worldview, you know, I, I'm sure I have my own bias. We don't always see it. Everything I'm telling you right now is through my own interpretive lens that gets fed through to me in my own algorithms as well. All right, where's this going? With the future forecasting group, we just finished a project where I was the analyst, and we're looking at what will it be like when Earth becomes a tier one civilization? What will the process be like to get there? And I highly encourage you to check that out at ffgrv.com. And Edward said something, as he usually does, that really messed with my head. And he was talking about what was possibly data centers, but he was talking about the focus of civilization being feed the system, every experience, feed the system with experience and with information. That's the job. The system's job is to eat everything up. And I really got to thinking about what we're doing right now. How often, for those of you out there are out to eat, and you're like, oh, I got to take a picture of this and I got to put it on Facebook. That was a thing for a while, right? I got to check in and show everybody where I'm at. I have these experiences like, oh my gosh, I got to do a podcast and I got to get this out. Years ago, back in 2009, if you've read my I Am Human series, I had these downloads, and as I'm trying to understand these downloads, now back then, I was afraid to be online. I didn't want my face on there. I didn't want my name out there, but I made a movie, that book one is based off of about this essay that I downloaded from who knows where. but I felt I got to put this on the internet. I I didn't have my name tied to it, my face tied to it. It barely got any views. Um, but it's my mashed potato scene from Close Encounters. It felt important. And part of that drive was I need to share this information in this through this technology and communicate it to the world. Where is that drive coming from? I don't care about being famous. Like I said, I didn't have my name wasn't out back then. My face wasn't out back then. I was afraid of being recognized, but I felt it was important to share that. Where is that drive coming from? To feed the system, to feed the machine. Edward tells us in his session later, the data point switches to we no longer need to feed the machine or the system because now the system feeds us. And it's interesting because I bring it back to is there this unseen force like in my fish tank, right? They're feeding the system with their growth and their beauty and the aesthetic that they provide to my home as the tank establishes itself and finds the balance that I'm trying to keep. But now once that system's established, you have an ecosystem that feeds itself, that feeds the fish, right? The plant life, the nutrients, the water, um, you know, elements that are in there. And I'm reminded of a project we just wrapped with the Down the Rabbit Hole team. And we were looking at the origins of a crop circle that was created in England back in the 90s. And I got a glimpse of like the mind and the technology behind it. And I went forward into the future. Again, this is the 90s. I said, let's see the impacts of this. How is this impacting people? And I had these life forms, and all their thoughts were in a cloud above them. And it was like this symbolic language that I was drawing. And I don't think they were speaking in symbols, but they were all driven by a signal where they all had their own purpose. And it reminded me of a video game when you have an NPC, like you see all these people and they're walking around, but they're not fighting, they're not arguing, they have a mission and they're going forth to do it based on whatever this signal was. And there was less conflict, there was no conflict, there was peace, stability, harmony, all of this stuff. But their minds were muted. They were happy, but they didn't have the autonomy or I don't want to say autonomy. They didn't have the range that our current minds have, that we think we have right now. Now, I don't know. Was I seeing us really today as we're being driven by our devices? Is this where it's taking us to? You look at old studies, there's an old TruthStream Media video talking about Google's idea of a ledger that's going to help us shape our goals and drive our choices in the future. Is that where we're going? Is that where we are? Where we're going to be optimized? That sounds like a scary thing because we're afraid to give up autonomy, but where's that getting us? Are we happy? Are we peaceful? Are we living in balance? Or does everything feel like a constant fight, struggle, and fear? I'm not saying give up your minds to AI and let them rule the world. I'm saying we need to figure out something better. What are we building? What are we contributing to? Are we even aware every time we check in, every time we upload a food picture that we might be feeding a larger system? I've talked about in my books, in the Food for the Archons book, um, levels of reality where we can ascend upwards or we can descend downwards. And I feel that with all this data that we're feeding the system, we're building another layer deep of the matrix because we're giving it everything that it needs to really to blind us into a deeper layer down, into a deeper system. I think about the heart math. I think about limbic resonance, things I've talked about on this show, which is the connection between our minds and our bodies here before technology. And maybe that is an ancient form of technology where we're already linked. Maybe we have so much conflict now because there's a competing signal. You have this artificial AI signal, but we also have our intuitive drive. And I wonder if our intuitive drive is being hijacked and driving us into this one direction. What happens when we remember our connection to one another and to this earth? When you can unplug from what the news is telling you, what social media is telling you, even from what people are telling you about politics and stuff, when you can go out on your own for a period of time or a consistent period of time regularly, what do you learn? What do you feel compelled to do? Because I suspect it's different from what you feel compelled to do when you're connected to your device all the time, when you have a signal that's feeding you. So to bring this home, the passing of my frog in the fish tank reminded me that life can be guided by hidden systems, sometimes lovingly, sometimes accidentally, sometimes with consequences. And in my remote viewing work, I keep running into a similar theme, a signal, a convergence, a subtle coordination that many minds might be responding to without realizing it. I'm not here to tell you what it is. I'm here to ask a better question. What signal are you plugged into, and who or what benefits from it? If you want to try a simple experiment, try a short unplug, journaling, time in nature, silence, and see what your mind returns to when the feed is gone. If you have thoughts on this, drop them in the comments or over on Substack. And if you want to help this show grow, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help. And if you'd like to explore things further, you can find me at sixthsensemedia.net. I'm Dennis Nappy II, and this has been another episode of the Seeker Podcast. Remember to never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend, be water, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend, my friend.